Today, we're going to be looking at religion in American society today. And when we talk about religion broadly speaking, we are a very multicultural nation, but we're still very much predominantly Christian. So while we think of ourselves as diverse, when we really think about religion, we're not as diverse as we might think we are. We have a lot of different types of religion, but the overwhelming number of people are still Protestant or Catholic or some version of theist. Now, how do Americans think about God? That's what we're going to be looking at today. And when it says deists still dominate, that means that still America is one of the most traditionally religious, industrialized countries in the world. Now, you might not think that if you come from Concord or Carlisle or Boston, because if you look at the map, you'll notice that these are the places where people describe themselves as very religious. And not surprisingly, the darkest blue areas are areas across the South, broadly speaking, and in through the Deep South particularly, where really to be non-religious in those areas is to be almost excluded from your community. You really need to be religious to be part of the community, broadly speaking. And this is true for both white and black populations. They're just very strongly religious. If you look at where we are up in the New England area, the New England is really a religious bubble. It used to be back in the 19th century. It was the hotbed of American evangelical religion. It was where all of the major movements started. The Mormons originated in upstate New York. Many religious cults and organizations in Western Massachusetts and New York also. But the point is now we're really not a very religious area of the country. And so in that sense, we're really disconnected from how a lot of other people in the country think and believe about religious things. So I think that's an important factor and something to consider, that we're really not representative of the larger part of the country. So if you look at the breakdown by religious affiliation, not surprisingly, if you look at evangelical Protestant, these are people who are advocating within these traditions. So if you look at interreligious Catholic and evangelical Protestant, these are and other Christian, you'll notice that this gets well over 75% Christian when you begin to put all of it together. It's ignoring the fact that there are a lot of people that don't see themselves as religious. So if you look at this, it really is showing you that Muslims, Jews, and Buddhists represent a very small group, relatively speaking, to other Christian groups. So this is a little hard to see, but basically that big red area, these are the leading religious organizations in each, or the predominant groups in each part of the country. And you'll notice that light blue area where we are, those are Catholics. And the red is Baptists, so Southern Baptists. That's both white and black denominations of Southern Baptists. But if you look at other groups here out in the West, you'll see the Latter-day Saints. Those are the Mormons out through Utah and spread out through those rural communities in the general Western area. Methodists in that sort of central area in the green, and other Christian groups like Lutherans up in that upper area around North Dakota, Minnesota, areas like that. So there is diversity within the Protestant traditions for sure, as you look at the map. So how do Americans think about God? Well, first of all, about a third of U.S. adults believe in a higher power of some kind, but not in God as described in the Bible. And that shows you that even people who aren't particularly religious still think that there's something there, that there's something higher than themselves. And I think that's important. So atheism really still remains a small part of our society, even though there's a growing number of people who are declaring themselves as non-religious. They're not practicing religion anymore. So here again, looking at another way that Americans describe things, there still people believe in an active God. They believe in a God that basically determines things in their lives. And they see God as something that that engages them and engages with them. And I think that's an important factor because, again, a lot of people who are closer to the agnostic perspective think about God in a more passive way, but that's not where the majority of Americans are. Now, the nones here are people that don't affiliate with any tradition, and that number is growing. The number of people, particularly in your generation, there are a lot more people your age who simply don't believe in God, but if you look at this, do believe in some higher power or spiritual force. So even people who have no religious tradition still are in some ways either looking for that or are in touch with it in some way, aren't willing to discount it. And that's interesting because that means while people are retreating out of the traditional Christian churches, the numbers are dropping, there's still interest in finding other expressions for religion. And I think that could very much be something that we're going to be seeing in the future. How religious traditions redefine themselves. So this is basically looking at how people, why people are religious. What's the motivation? Obviously, the connection to God is important. I think it's important also this idea that children will have a moral foundation, or to make me a better person. In some ways, that's personal morality or morality for your kids. I think is really interesting because this suggests that you really need to have something larger. School's not going to do it. You need something that's going to connect you to an institution that's going to emphasize moral values, and that is what church provides for many people. I think it's also interesting to look for people looking for comfort, particularly when things are difficult in the middle of a pandemic or whatever the case may be. Religion provides a harbor, a place to go. So that's looking at it from the Christian perspective. Obviously, the Catholic perspective and the Catholic sex abuse crisis, which has been going on, really, it's subsided a little bit in the last couple of years, but you'll notice that it was something that was quite ongoing for a while. And this originally, one of the places that this was centered was in Boston. And if you've seen the movie Spotlight, it focuses on that, how the Catholic Church was hiding these things, hiding sexual abusers in the clergy and in the priesthood, and moving them around and causing all kinds of problems for the church, and a lot of people who left the church because of it. So I think it's interesting because, of course, this is not only related to Catholics. There's been a Protestant sex abuse crisis too. There was a Buddhist sex abuse crisis. It broadly was something that, as people became more willing to talk about these sorts of abuses, they became more evident across religious traditions. And if we have time, maybe we can talk more about why is it that religions, specifically hierarchical ones, have a tendency towards abuse. So we've had obviously tensions within the Catholic Church that have been publicly addressed, such as the sexual abuse crisis. We've also had the emergence of increasingly extreme evangelical religion. And if you look at this, you can tell it's a little bit dated because President Kerry hasn't run for office in 12 years or so. But, the point here is you're looking at people who are trying to bring religion back into the public sphere. And this is sort of a precursor to what we see with Trump. Why is it that so many evangelical Christians support Trump? Well, it's because they think that their form of religion and their way of life is disappearing as the secularists and as the people that don't represent with religion increase in the population, particularly in the coasts, in the cities. They see their only possibility is to get more extreme in their expressions of their religion and more defensive in that expression as well. So I think this is interesting because again, if you look at the percentage of evangelicals in the United States, and evangelicals, by the way, are people who are Protestant, who are trying to go out and convince other people to also become Protestant. They believe that we should all convert to Protestantism. They're the people who are out in the streets trying to get you to understand that you are a sinner and that you can find your Savior and your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. this is very much the evangelical tradition. So evangelicals are feeling threatened, and I think rightfully so. Not to justify their more extreme aspects of this sort of political expression, but you get the idea. Now, Buddhism is also interesting because if you look at Buddhism, you'll notice that it's concentrated on the East Coast, up and down that industrial corridor, and along the West Coast primarily, and in Colorado, because there are a number of monasteries and colleges and so forth that are Buddhist in Colorado. And you'll also notice Hawaii. Hawaii is Buddhist for a different reason. It's because there is a large Asian population there, so the Japanese, Chinese, and Southeast Asian communities there are practicing Buddhist. So it's a largely Buddhist, not largely Buddhist, but there are many more Buddhists in Hawaii than there are in other parts of the country in terms of percentage of population. If you look at why it is that the coasts are largely Buddhist, it's because that's where the educated population is. Buddhism appeals broadly to highly educated people who have gone to college, who have master's degrees, and who have a certain social status too. So it's interesting that Buddhism is on the rise with the people who are otherwise leaving those Christian traditions. And also, I think worth noting, Buddhism has become increasingly popular in African American populations, particularly in prison populations, which is interesting, in the South in certain areas, as well as there are more and more Black Buddhist teachers in places like Boston, Massachusetts, for example. There's a growth there as well. Finally, the Jews. You'll notice that Jewish people are highly concentrated in urban areas in the Northeast, and of course down in Palm Beach, Florida. Let's see if you look at that blue area, dark blue area in Florida. Those are all the retired Jews. And there's huge populations in certain areas. For example, the larger tri-state area of New York City, southern New York State, Connecticut, and New Jersey. Up till about 10 years ago, there were more Jewish people living there than there were in the state of Israel. So it was basically like a little Jewish enclave within the United States there. So generally speaking, particularly more conservative Jewish traditions, they need to live together because of their kosher laws. Their kosher laws are their dietary laws. They have to live in communities together. And it's interesting to notice that, again, the Jewish population still remains primarily urban-based. Finally, we have the Muslims. Muslims also are going to be based largely in urban areas. The Muslim population in the United States is extremely diverse. It's primarily made up of people from the Middle East, from Africa, and some people who've converted from here, whether they are African American or white. But what you'll notice is that Muslims tend to be concentrated in certain states. And just like the Jewish population is only 2% of the United States population. The Muslim population is less than 1% of the American population, which is strange when you think about the Muslim threat that Trump trotted out in the last election. It's hard for a population that small to really represent a significant threat. And also you'll notice that Muslims have made a very strong effort, particularly since 9/11, to assimilate and be more part of the broader population. In some ways, their headscarves and other aspects of their traditions separate them from American culture. They've been trying to come together. So this is a brief overview of religion in the United States currently. A few trends to just summarize. First of all, increasing numbers of young people who are abandoning traditional religions, who are looking towards either new religions or looking towards new forms of spirituality. Very strong traditions, but minority traditions of Muslims, Jews, and Buddhists. And generally speaking, we still are a people, despite our variety of traditions, who believe in some form of God. We are a religious people. And I think that's worth noting. So I hope that helps you out. And I think it's quite interesting. And maybe as you look around the United States or travel, you'll see these patterns as you go.